All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about three very related topics. And they're very related because the mathematics in them is fairly related. And we're going to talk about how you're going to use it and what you need to know. Because part of the things that you're going to be doing, obviously you're not just going to be multiplying a number times a fraction and that's your answer. You also need to discuss what it is you've done. And it really comes into play here with one of these topics, and I'll talk to you about that in a moment. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is GST. You've heard of GST before. It's the tax you pay on items that you buy, goods and services tax. Good. So we're going to talk about how to put GST in, and we're going to talk about how to take it off. Super simple. There's a little graphic that we're going to use, and you should put that in your cheat sheet for sure, and then you don't have to worry about when to do what. Okay? So for GST, here's our graphic. If you have the price excluding GST, so no GST is in that price, right? Then what we're going to be finding is the price including GST. And we're going to go both directions. Right? So we may be given the price excluding, and they'll always tell you if it's excluding or including, the price excluding GST, and we want to find the price including GST. And then sometimes you're going to have the price including GST, and you're going to want to get rid of it. Go back to find out how much was the item originally. Okay? So is it pretty clear what we're doing? Going from original price to price with tax and price without it. Okay? Now, because y'all are lucky because your price that you see already includes it when you see that. In the States, the price does not include the tax. They add that on afterwards. So much fun because it's 8.75%. So you have 8.25 or 8.75 depending where you are. So figure that out in your head real quick. Not good. All right. So, okay. Sorry. So what you're going to do is if you want to put more GST in, GST is a percentage and you are increasing. So a percent increase means you multiply by 100% plus the percent increase, right? And the GST is always 15%. So that means you're simply going to multiply by 1.15. So it simply means increase by 15%. Okay? All right. Now, but this one is a little different because decrease by it doesn't mean we're going to subtract it off. We need to get rid of that entire amount. We're not talking about a percentage off. We need to remove what we've added. So it's a little different than decrease. If I'm going to just decrease a price by 20%, I just take 100 minus 20% and multiply. My multiplier becomes 80%, right? Or 0.8. But when you're taking off the GST, we need to remove the stuff we've already added. So it's going to be slightly different. And that's the only place you can get into trouble, but because you have your cheat sheet, you're not, right? So instead of subtracting 15%, what we're going to do is we're simply going to divide by the same thing we multiplied by. We're undoing that multiplication. So we're not finding a decrease on the price. We're undoing the multiplication that we did to get the GST. Does that make sense? So just like in algebra, right? To undo multiplication, you use division. To undo division, you use multiplication, right? Okay? So those are our multipliers, and the number we're going to divide by, that says divide, by the way. It's a terrible division symbol. There you go. And that's all there is to it. Okay, so we're just going to go through a few examples of this. I drew this way too big to do our other examples, but you've got your notes on one side and your examples on the other, right? Like you're supposed to, but I didn't. So let's just say we have, like number one, we have $86, and they're asking us to add GST. A little misleading. That just means that this is the price excluding GST. We want the price including GST. It has nothing to do with addition. So we're simply going to take 86 times, what's our multiplier? 1.15. And somebody want to do that and give me an answer, please? Remember, always have your calculators out, guys. 98 point what? 9. And since we're talking about dollars, let's go ahead and put a 0 at the end. And we need to always make sure we put our units. So with GST, that item would cost you $98.90. How easy is your life right now? Yeah? You gotta love this part. It's all right. I'll get you later with the algebra sections. No? Okay. All right? Now, let's do one, this, the other. So on the next page, number 1, we want to exclude GST. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. So we're going to exclude GST. So instead of multiplying by 1.15, what are we going to do? So take 98 divided by 1.15. Anybody?
85.22.
Perfect. Good. Remember, money always rounded to 2 decimal places. And always put in your units. So we're talking dollars here, so make sure your answer is in dollars. It's good. Need to do about 15 of those each? No. Okay. Make sure, though, that this little graphic is in... Oops. The whole thing. Make sure that this little graphic is included in your cheat sheet. Make it small enough so that you have room for everything else, too. But make sure you include that graphic so you know that when you're going to the price including and you're excluding GST. Yeah? Okay. So an example. They might ask you, you're going to buy something and the sale is that they will pay the GST. So that means you need to take the GST off to find out how much you're going to pay. Yeah? All right. So we'll look at some of those problems as well. Good. So now you can see why that one was a no-brainer. We're just going to put that with some other stuff because it's also a no-brainer. The other two things that I want to talk about today both involve formulas. Formulas that you do not have to remember, right? You just have to make sure that you're using the right one, and we'll talk about it. The first one we're going to talk about is something called simple interest. Now, I know that you've done this before, but you may not remember. Okay? The amount you earn of some simple interest is simply the principal times the rate times the time. And usually it's not capital. Sorry, I'm being very bad. PRT. Okay? Where principal is the original amount that you either borrow or put in the bank to save, whatever, your original amount. R is the rate. Now, it's generally given. You might have seen this formula before where they divide it by 100. That's because they use the rate as a percent, and to change a percent to a decimal, you divide it by 100. So that I don't bother with that. It's the rate. Just put as a decimal. So you'll know to convert it to a decimal before you put it in the formula. And T is the time, always in years. Okay? So let me ask you a few questions about T. Time in years. So if I have it for 5 years, then T is just going to be 5. If I have it for 1 year, T is just going to be 1. What if I have it for 6 months? Half a year. Good. So you could either use the fraction 1/2 or 0.5. Yeah. So it's less than a year, definitely, but it's just going to be a fraction of the year. Okay? 9 months. That's 3/4 of a year, isn't it? Okay? So 0.75. There you go. Good job. There you go. And that's why I want to talk about that, because we don't often think of years as being less than a year, right? Count them usually in whole numbers. But you can have a part of a year. All right? Good job. So let's just look at one of those just so that we can all make sure we can do those. So this is on page 45. Calculate the simple interest earned when $1,500 is invested at 7% for 5 years. $1,500.
Wait, so what does A stand for?
A is the amount you're going to earn. That's the amount of interest. I'm sorry. I didn't put that on there, did I? A is the amount of interest. Thank you for that. Amount of interest. So it's going to tell you how much you're going to earn. So this isn't going to be like with the increase or decrease where it gives you the total amount at the end. It's just going to tell you the amount of interest you get. So 15% invested, $1,500 invested at 7% for 5 years. I'm abbreviating a little. It's fine. So the amount we're going to earn in interest is the principal times the rate, and it's 7%, so 0.7. And we're putting in there for 5 years, so just 5. Very straightforward, yes? So, somebody want to do those calculations for me and tell me how much money I'm earning? Anyone? 1,500 times 0.7 times 5. Sorry? 525 it comes out to? Okay. Yep, and exactly it is in dollars, right? Do you agree? Everybody agree with that? Think about it. 500 is less than the 1,500 I put in, right? So it's not the final amount you have. That's just the amount of interest. What if I want the total amount after the 5 years? What could I do to find that? It's just the amount of interest plus the principal. So we had $1,500 plus the $525 we earned gives us $2,025 at the end of our 5 years. So be prepared to add that back in to get a total amount. This just tells you how much interest you're earning. There's no way to find both of them at the same time. Okay? So find out how much interest you're earning, and then you can find out the rest. Looks good? Okay? Now, the other one we're going to talk about involves a slightly different formula, and that's compound interest. And I want to talk a little bit about the difference between the two. If you're dealing with simple interest, it doesn't matter how long you keep it in there, you only get the interest paid one time. Right? Now, then what they do is if you're making payments and it's simple interest, which is never going to happen, by the way, is somebody if you loaned her $20 and at 5%, you'd probably do simple interest. If it took her 2 years to pay it out, you just find out how much and then divide it out into equal installments, right? But you would still only pay that one amount of interest. But compound interest has what are called compounding periods. So in other words, you're paid interest more than one time, right? So we only got one amount of interest over the whole 5 years. But with compounding interest, I'll earn my interest, and then the next amount of interest is going to be compounded, or is going to be calculated with that new amount of money in there as well. So the amount of money that you have is always going up. So that means you're going to get more interest the longer you leave the money in, right? Now the rate won't change, but the rest of it will. And there's a formula for it as well, and it's an exponential formula, but your calculator can do this for you, so don't worry about it. A equals P. What's P stand for? Principal, either the amount you borrowed or the amount you deposited, depending on if you're getting a loan or putting in savings. 1 plus the rate. Now that should be familiar because we're increasing by a particular percent. That's a percent increase, right? 1 plus the rate. But the reason it's separated here is because you need to raise that part to the nth power. And I'll do the definitions. Again, A is simply the amount of interest. That didn't change. P is the principal, either the amount you borrowed or the amount you invested. R is still the rate. And in order to do this, we still want to make sure we're using it as a decimal. And N is the number of compounding periods per year. Now that one we need to talk about a little bit, just like we talked about the months a while ago, like it's half a year or something. So you can have different number of compounding periods per year. For example, if you have a credit card, they're going to charge you interest every month. They're going to charge you interest, right? So that's compounded every single month. So how many months in a year? So that means 12 compounding periods, right? Now that's a slightly bad example because credit card balances don't stay the same all the time. But let's just say you're paying, all right, let's do a car payment. You have a car payment, most of you probably don't, but if you had a car payment and you paid it monthly, they're going to compound that interest monthly. So every month they're going to add interest and you're going to make a payment based on that. Okay? So how many compounding periods would that be? 12. Okay? Now, you could also be compounding every 6 months. Well, how many 6 months are there in 1 year? 2. So that means for every year there are 2. So what if I leave it in there if it takes 5 years to pay it off? That's 2 for 5 years. So how many compounding periods? 10 total, right? You're going to multiply it times the number of years. So what if I pay interest every quarter? Quarter means how many periods? 4. And I'd keep it in there for 7 years. 4 times 7 would give you 28 compounding periods. So do you see how it works? So it's how many years times how many times. Now, most of these you're going to see they just compound it for 1 year. You get 1 compounding period per year. So you can just use, so that corresponds to like the T we used before. But the reason it's in is because it can be more than that. You can compound more. Okay? There's even such a thing as saying compounded continuously, which means every second they compound it. It's a savings trick. Don't fall for it. It doesn't get you any extra money. Yes?
So, if for compounding periods per year, right? So if you have like, say it's every 6 months, so it's 2, but for 4 years, so would you put 8 or would you just put
8. So 2 periods for 4 years would be 8 total periods.
You put 8, not 2, so not just per year, but like per year and how?
Times the number of years. Yeah. So it's the number, let's just write a formula. The number per year times the number of years. How's that? Okay? So if it's only compounded once a year, then that number would be 1. But if it's compounded 4 times a year, that number would be 4. And then times the number of years that the money's in there. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's look at 1. 1 is pretty easy. We'll do that one. $7,500 is invested, this is page 46, is invested at 6% compound interest. What is the value after 2 years? So they didn't tell you that it was compounded monthly or there were 2 periods every 6 months or anything else. So we just assume years is all there is, once per year. Okay? So amount equals the principal times 1 plus the rate raised to the n power. Let's just list these out. You won't need to list them out, but I want to just for effect. So the amount is what we're looking for. Our principal in this case is the $7,500. Our rate is 6%, so that's 0.06. And if it doesn't tell you that it's more than once a year, then it's once a year times the number of years. So what is our n going to be in this case? Just the 2 years. So it's the same as our t before, but slightly different in some cases. All right, so now we can plug those into the formula. So A equals 7,500 times 1 plus 0.06 raised to the second power. And again, you can do this completely with your calculator. Remember though, when you're doing brackets, not parentheses, sorry, I keep saying parentheses. When you're doing brackets, you do what's inside the bracket first. Then you do the exponent, and this multiplier, this coefficient, is last. Remember your order of operations? So you'll do 1 plus that, so that's 7,500 times 1.06. Then you'll square that part. So it's 7,500 times, somebody want to square that 1.06 for me, please?
1.1236.
And then you'll multiply those two together. Because I'm a genius, I know that that's coming out to 8427, and I also have it written in my book. So, we don't add anything to it. This is the amount you're going to get, right? With simple interest, we have to add, that's just the amount of interest. This is actually the amount you're going to get because of that 1 plus business. So we are getting the amount, the original amount plus the increase. It's good? What if I wanted to know how much interest I earned on that? How can I find that? This is the total amount I get at the end. How much did I put in? So the amount of interest I earned is simply the difference between those two. Yeah? So that number minus the principal would tell you how much interest you have. Okay? Y'all want to see another one of those? Let's do another one of those real quick. Let's see. Oh, well, they didn't give you any different periods. So every one of these n is going to be the number of years. All right, so look at number 3. It says, what is the value of $65,000 at 4.5% compound interest, okay, at the end of 10 years? Oh, they're not giving you any that are broken up, but that's okay. So, A equals $65,000 times 1 plus, this is a decimal, is going to be 0.045. Be careful about that. And how many years? 10. What if it said every 6 months for 10 years? It would be 20, right? 6 months is 2 times a year, right? Get the pattern? They don't give you anything like that in your homework, but I'm worried about that. All right. Now, you can enter this in your calculator all at one time if you want to, using your brackets. If you have a graphics calculator. With a scientific, you can't. But it doesn't really matter. You do it the way you want to do it. So, you can put this in, then raise that answer to the 10th power, and then multiply it times 65,000. Doesn't matter to me. And anybody want to tell me what we earn? Somebody do that one? Okay, what'd you get? 100,943.01. So 10, just read me the digits.
100, then 943.0124.
Okay, and we're talking about money, so we won't worry about the 24 at the end. Do we have some confirmation?
Yeah.
I'm going to teach you this. All right, so here we go. So one of the things that we're going to talk about, so it's very unlikely that you're going to be tested on simple interest or compound interest, but it's not hard to calculate just in case you are, right? The values you get on the test, the questions you get on the test, we're going to do 2 practice tests and then a regular one. And you could be on some of them asked to find compound or simple interest. You might also be asked to find some strategies explaining how you could increase the money you have. How could you increase the amount of money you have? Could you put it in a bank and earn interest? Would you like a small interest rate or a large one? Yeah, you want the biggest one possible, right? Now, but when you're explaining these, do not come up with some outrageous number. Nobody is going to pay you 50% interest, right? It's going to be more like 4. So don't pick something crazy. Look at the examples they give you, and they keep interest rates here are pretty standard. They're a little high, actually. Now I think interest is like 2 for savings. But it's still better than nothing, okay? So, and you can compare, if you want, simple interest and compound interest. Just a matter of keystrokes on a calculator, yeah? And say, I can put this in the bank at 2% simple interest and earn this much over the time. Or I could put it in the bank and earn 2% interest, compound interest and have this much at the end. This means I would have more money at the end of the time to spend on my new sofa or whatever. Okay? So make sure when you're showing your work, this is showing your work. We know you're going to put that in the calculator. So you need to write that, and you need to write out your answer with units. And then you'll describe how those numbers are used. And you'll see in the practice how we're going to describe those. Right? So for example, you might have somebody's going to buy a bunch of stuff and they have two different stores. One store has a sale of 30% off on a bunch of different items. You remember year 10? One store has another sale, but you also get to take the GST off. Or if you pay it out, you get some different interest rate or something. So you're going to be comparing to see which one would be the better deal.
When is the practice?
As soon as we're finished with this, we've got to talk a little bit about about ratios, and then we'll be ready to start our first practice. We're going to do two, one totally together in class, one you're going to do kind of on your own in class. So on your own, I mean as a group kind of, but still just to refine your cheat sheet and make sure everybody's on the same page. And then we'll do the actual test. Oh, no, we have extra time. I'm sorry. Let me stop there.